The Renaissance was an era that brought us many cultural wonders. Perhaps most famously is people dying in really, really dumb ways. Now, that's not unique to the Renaissance, like a lot of the worthless and boring artwork and cultural movements that came out of the time period that no one ever talks about again. But some of the deaths to come out of the Renaissance are uniquely hilarious. Hi, I'm Huggbees, and not only do I play a handsome man on the internet, I'm just as handsome in real life. This is part 3 in my video series on the Wikipedia article entitled List of Unusual Deaths. You can find links to part 1 and 2 in the description wherever YouTube fucking puts that thing. And you can find me covering the Renaissance period of this list in this video right now. And you know what? We'll also cover the early modern period portion of the list because, well, I like you so darn much. George Plantagenet, the Duke of Clarence, is up first, and most of you probably know him as the main antagonist of that awful PlayStation game Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelists of the Roses. Oh, I'm sorry, in my infinite professionalism, I seem to have misread a typo in my script and forgot to remove it in editing. He was actually a key figure in the real-life War of the Roses, and historians are still debating if he may or may not have appeared in Yu-Gi-Oh! At some point. Personally, to me, he looks like a Battle City duelist who wouldn't hesitate to throw down a gimmick puppet egghead. Oh boy. I seem to have just used a bunch of semi-obscure Yu-Gi-Oh! References all over the first entry of this list. This video's doomed. Just like George was doomed after he plotted treason against his older brother. The War of the Roses I mentioned earlier was a series of civil wars in England to determine who in the hell would be King of England. If you're a big boy fan of the Montagues and Capulets or the Hatfields and McCoys, open a book sometime to read about the Yorks and the Lancasters, because their feuding caused a whole heap of bullshit to go down that was like Game of Thrones, except with a good ending and somehow even more dragons. Georgie Boy was born into the clan of York, and as family members kept dying off in the world's biggest game of musical chairs, he began to slowly move up the royalty ladder. During this time period of, ooh, I want to be the king, ooh, gimme, pick me, all sorts of back alley schemes were going on to push the competition out of the way, regardless of whatever blood relationship claim that you had. In a power move that he thought would make him a cool-ass dude, George wanted to marry a chick named Isabel Neville, who was the daughter of the Duke of Warwick. His older brother, King Edward VI, told him to get bent and said that he couldn't do that. Edward was a smart man. He knew that if George began laying some pipe in Warwick oil fields, then he could use that strong-arm political marriage as a bargaining chip to get his ass planted on the throne. Edward instead wanted his brother, who was a big fancy schmancy duke, keep that in mind, to keep himself single until the king himself could dictate his marriage for his own political gain. Now, George did what any independent person would do in this day and age. He observed the situation carefully and politely, but firmly said, "Fuck that," and married Isabel anyway. The Duke of Warwick, now aware that the Duke of Clarence was dropping a hot DNA duke inside of his daughter, approached George and said, "Yo, your brother, and I'm just being honest, man, but your brother is a piece of shit. Let's take over the throne, you and me, like father and adopted son." And so they did. Well, they didn't. They started a rebellion against George's brother King Edward VI and failed miserably. Then there was some double-crossing amongst all the parties, as was the style at the time, and a new group led by the Duke of Warwick drove Edward from the throne. George then groveled back to his brother to get in his good graces, and afterwards put together an elite task force that was initially sent to prison 10 years ago by a military court for a crime they didn't commit. And then he fought to put Edward back on the throne again. And then things were good, until Isabel did what only stupid people do. She died. George threw up his hands and told Edward he wanted to remarry, and Edward again was like, "No, man, no. I need you to stop marrying people so I can arrange these marriages to keep political power. Stop! Stop with that shit! What the fuck is wrong with you?" So there was another rebellion started by George against Edward VI, and again it failed, and Edward just gave him the most shocked fucking hands in the air expression and said, "Okay, you're done. I'm executing you for treason. You're done. hang up your jacket and get out of my kitchen. Get out!
Get the fuck out of here!
Now, Mr. Duke of Clarence was a nobleman, so he was able to pick his execution style, which was a privilege of them at the time. He chose to have it done privately to not give his brother any publicity over the event, but a pretty strong rumor started swirling around at the time that he chose to be drowned in a giant vat of wine. Now, I'm not a man to deal in just rumors. As you know, everything that I say on my channel is objective truth. Watch. Just last week, I had such passionate, consensual sex with an adult female tiger that she learned to speak human languages and thanked me for my time. See? I didn't even blink. Now, this rumor actually has a lot of fun little happenings around it that might make it true. First of all, a famous portrait of George's daughter, the Countess of Salisbury, who not only showed her with a look on her face that confirms that she's the inventor of mediocre beef dish, but it showed her wearing a bracelet with a wine barrel charm on it. Also, Shakespeare, a man you may or may not have heard of, included George in a couple of his plays. In the play Henry III, George is stabbed by two assassins, and one of them declares that he will drown you in the Malmsey butt within. Now, I'm gonna regret telling you what this means because the phrase "I'll drown you in the Malmsey butt within" is a great line that you should say before you try to kill somebody, regardless of context. But in this context in particular, Malmsey refers to a type of sweet wine, and butt is an Old English term for a large vat or container. Oh, would you look at that? Once you're done giggling at the silly words and digest the context, you realize that this dude just said, "Yo, I'm gonna drown you in a vat of sweet wine." Whether or not he added "motherfucker" to the end of that line is up for historical speculation, as is whether or not Malmsey butt actually refers to what your mother lugs around when she goes through Walmart trying to find deals on "I solemnly swear that I'm up to no good" t-shirts. But one explanation for all of this is that George was a big drunk, and history wrote this fiction as fact as a way to make fun of him. Other researchers theorize that his body may have been hidden in a wine barrel to ship it back to his home for burial. But in my mind, George thought he was being clever in thinking, "Oh, I could just drink all the wine before I drown in it." But when he remembered that a butt of wine is about 105 gallons, he acquiesced that at least he'd be dying partying harder than any man before him. Now, George may have failed in his mission to just get fucking shwasted instead of killed, but what about people who literally died by partying too hard? In 1518, there was a plague. And no, it wasn't the Black Death or smallpox or yellow fever or Spanish fever or Russian flu or SARS or Ebola or swine flu or bird flu or any other disease plague for that matter. It was a plague of dancing. And it fucking killed people. The dancing plague of 1518 is pretty self-explanatory, but allow me to summarize what the hell happened for you so when you sit down with your Thanksgiving family at Thanksgiving dinner, you can have an interesting factoid to bring up during conversation before your uncle begins complaining about how Target's self-checkout wouldn't let him receive a free Xbox with a coupon that he obviously photoshopped himself. For 3 straight months in Strasbourg-Alsace, which is a region in East France, an estimated 50 to 400 people partied themselves into an early grave. Now, the specific details of the story are under scrutiny, but the event itself did happen and is widely documented from primary sources at the time. In fact, similar plagues occurred in Switzerland, Germany, and Holland, but this one was the big boy, the one that went so hard that people fucking died. Starting in July, a woman took to the streets to dance. And she wasn't just low-key jamming to a groovy tune, she was going buck fucking wild to the hardest hitting club hit of the era. Absolute silence. Like this. She just danced for no reason, and she did it for a week straight. Everyone watching did what any logical, insane human being would do in this situation. They joined in! Now, we all know the deep underlying and sad truth about the modern world. We're all giant pussies. If this happened today, modern doctors would have been big dumb nerds and said things like, "Oh, let's sedate them and do some blood work," or "You need to go to the emergency room to screen for poisoning," or "Huggbees, your fibromyalgia is only gonna get worse if you keep dancing like this. I know you're training for the Iditarod, but the dogs are the ones who are supposed to pull the sled, not you." Modern doctors don't know shit. Now, see, this was medicine of the 1500s, and they really knew their stuff. They attributed this dancing plague to hot blood and said the only cure for the afflicted was to keep on dancing until they got it out of their system. Professional dancers and even a fucking band were called in to provide routines and music to help keep the infected keep their groove going. This, surprisingly, didn't work at all and made things worse. People just wouldn't stop dancing. Eventually, members of the pack began collapsing from exhaustion. Some of them died because they suffered strokes or a heart attack. Eventually, the Church of the Holy Roman Empire stepped in and said, okay, guys, you can keep dancing, but go dance someplace where the Lord won't see. Everyone climb this mountain over here, and when you're at the top, while you're dancing, make sure to pray to the Lord for forgiveness. And then you can, I don't know, keep dancing till you go to hell or some shit. I don't know, whatever. Once the dancers heard that they were switching the tunes to gospel music, the party quietly disbanded and rock and roll officially died. So what the hell happened? There's two leading theories. The first is the classic excuse you use when you really need to get out of going to class but promise yourself you'll go tomorrow. Food poisoning. Grains in the region could have been infected with fungi that resulted in bread and other foods being laced with psychoactive chemicals. This stuff would have been similar to LSD, and is believed to be one of the causes of the Salem witch trials, and I'm gonna assume that you've been through high school and you know what a big load of debauchery that whole thing was. The other idea, and amusingly enough, the one that has more evidence supporting it, is people just kinda went a little batshit cuckoo for a second. Mass hysteria could have erupted in the region thanks to stress, which compounded into psychogenic movement disorder. In other words, shit sucked so hard that everyone danced their problems away, but a lot of people got so into the groove that they couldn't fucking stop. Now, I see this all happening because of a combination of both factors, and let me take you on a little tour through the time period to explain why. Imagine you live in the 1500s, and things are bad, even by 1500 standards. You're constantly starving because of low crop yields and riddled with disease thanks to the newest peasant destroyer rolling through town. Someone eventually musters up the willpower to make a loaf of bread and takes a bite, and after that, the hallucinogens in there begin coursing through your veins. So everyone says fuck it and starts dancing, and your superstitious ass thinks that it could be one of 100 different levels of post-Christ irony. And what would you look at that? Now your feet are already shuffling like it's party rock in the house tonight. We've covered dying of laughter in this video series twice already, so I'm just gonna footnote this next example and move on to something more unique. Petra Aretino was an accomplished satirical author who was said to have died from laughing too hard at a dirty joke he overheard while having dinner. There's other accounts that say that he fell from a chair laughing and cracked his skull, or that he had a heart attack or a stroke from laughing, or perhaps most likely, the internet said he died of laughing, and I had to mention this fact so people wouldn't think I missed one, and it's a great advertisement for the previous installments of my series in the description, because dying of laughter is shockingly common and we should move on. Now, this next entry on the list might seem like the death of someone important, and yeah, it is. But more importantly, it's the death of an entire sport. King Henry II of France was a real big boy in the world of kingly manliness. He loved to joust. Yeah, believe it or not, that lance-poking horseback contest that you see at the Renaissance Fair was a real fucking thing, and that's why it's called the Renaissance Fair. And to most of you, this is obvious, but one person out there watching just went, oh my fucking god, I get it now. King Henry's daughter had just married the King of Spain. So King Henry screamed, yo, my daughter's getting laid. Let's have a joust to celebrate. And everyone cheered and went, yeah. And then some guy in the back went, I got next. And no one knew if he was referring to the jousting tournament or Henry's daughter's snatch. And that info is lost to time, but it's not important. The jousting tournament went off and Henry stepped out for his turn. He jousted the shit out of his opponent, and a splinter from a fractured jousting lance needled itself into Henry's eye. The royal surgeons tried everything they could to fix it, but it was like a game of operation. They tried to get the splinter out and bzzz, oh, you touch sides. What if we go in from this angle? Psst, oh, shit. Oh, it's stuck in there forever. So they prescribed him the second best remedy they could come up with. And I'm quoting historical documents here. They advocated a wait and see strategy. The king later died of sepsis a little over a week later. Now this here wasn't just the death of a king, it was the death of jousting. This incident is noted throughout history as being the turning point when jousting started to fall out of popularity. People started doing their ancient peasant math together and said, wait, like, the king died from a splinter in the eye because of jousting? Maybe charging at each other on horseback to jam giant wooden spears into each other is a bad idea? Okay, think about it like this. Imagine it's 1971 and you're watching a Detroit Lions football game. You're having a miserable time and you know that there's no chance of winning, but you're still along for the ride. You've just been informed that wide receiver Chuck Hughes died of a heart attack. Now that's a real event. That might be on this unusual list. I haven't gotten that far yet, but this really happened. Now imagine in this reality, the shockwaves from that incident are so great that people start thinking maybe we shouldn't be playing football anymore. This seems dangerous. And football slowly fades out of popularity from that point on until it all but disappears. Actually, you know what? With what we know about CTE these days, maybe that's a good idea. Okay, let's get ironic. Hans Stanager was a politician from Austria, famed the world over for his long-ass beard. Not like a long-ass beard, but like that. Okay, it didn't come from his ass. He had a beard that was really, really long. His beard was so impressive that he was crowned the Burgomaster of Braunau, which was a real title and not a Harry Potter character, I swear to you. While there's conflicting sources on the length of his beard, studies say that it was anywhere from 4.5 to 7 feet long when he died. Either way, that's long enough to kill you, and Hans knew this well, so he did what any responsible gun owner would do. He immediately disposed of his beard and said, "Wow, I'll never own something like that again. That shit could kill people." No, I'm just kidding. He did what most gun owners do. He stuck the thing in a holster he carried around at all times and whipped it out for any curious viewer to see. Whether or not his beard was loaded is up to historical debate, but I'm guessing he probably stuffed some goldfish pizza flavor blasted crackers in there for some snacking on the go. He seems like that type of guy. There's two primary stories as to how he met his end, but they all result in the same twist of fate. In one version, Hans was trying to escape a house fire, and in another, he was running after a prince so he could pay his respects. But in both versions, he tripped over his own beard, suffered a rather nasty fall, and broke his neck in the process. Now, thankfully, most importantly, everyone, take a breath. The beard was okay. And in fact is okay, because it was cut off his corpse for preservation and is currently in a glass case at a museum in Braunau. So if you go to visit it, you can finally hear this story and then say, "Braunau? How? Wow." Okay, this next one I'm just gonna read verbatim because I don't need to explain it, and I need you all to hear this. Good props and respect to anyone who watches these videos without reading the list ahead and spoiling yourself, because you're in for a fucking doozy with this one. I'm just gonna fucking plagiarize. I don't care. Here we go. Marco Antonio Bragadin, Venetian Captain General of the Famagusta in Cyprus, or Famagusta, probably Famagusta, was gruesomely killed in August 1571 after the Ottomans took over the city. He was dragged round the walls with sacks of earth and stone on his back. Next, he was tied to a chair and hoisted to the yardam of the Turkish flagship. That's like the big main, he was like sailing on like the middle pole thing, you know, where he was exposed to the taunts of sailors. Finally, he was taken to his place of execution in the main square, tied naked to a column and flayed alive. Bragadin's skin was stuffed with straw and sewn, reinvested in its military insignia, and exhibited riding an ox in a mocking procession along the streets of Famagusta. The macabre trophy was hoisted upon the masthead pennant of the personal galley of the Ottoman commander Amir Albar Mustafa Pasha, to be brought to Constantinople as a gift for Sultan Selim II. I don't think they really liked that guy. But don't worry, this isn't just a tragic tale of woe. Sometime in 1580, a Venetian seaman stole Bragadin's skin and brought it back to Venice, which earned him a hero's welcome. The people all cheered on the streets and said, "Look, that man has the skin of some guy who died 9 fucking years ago. Let's throw him a parade." Tycho Brahe was a big fucking astronomy weirdo who would be worthy of his own video. Don't believe me? The dude had a solid gold nose and a sidekick with dwarfism who claimed he was psychic. I'm gonna go ahead and let me just open my notes here and yep, we're gonna go ahead and add that one to the list. One peculiar adjective to describe him, however, was polite, because he was most effectively the politest man in the universe, and he was an astronomer, so he would know. Tycho was at a big old banquet in Prague and died only 11 days after attending. Why? Well, because he refused to leave the banquet to take a piss, thinking it would simply be too rude to do so, and ultimately that killed him. I really admire the man's dedication to being cordial, but you'd think people would notice. Oh, hey, Tycho, how you doing? Good. Really, really good. Are you sure? You don't look so good. No, I'm fine. I'm as polite as always. How are you? Tycho, are you holding your piss again for over 8 hours, dude? You need to go to the bathroom. Look, man, no one's gonna think you're rude, man. It's fine. Just go to the bathroom. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, God. When Tycho finally got home, he was able to release the golden yellow dragon from its cylindrical meat prison. Or so he thought. He no longer could piss at all, and when he did, it was extremely painful. Brahe had contracted a severe bladder and kidney infection from holding his piss so long, and most likely died of a fully inflamed prostate and uremia, which basically means you got pee-pee in your blood. What a dipshit. Oh, excuse me, that wasn't very polite to say. I meant to say, what a dipshit. Please? Thomas Urquhart, there's no goddamn way I said that right, was a Scottish aristocrat and translator who died of laughter after hearing Charles II had taken the throne as King of Scotland, and there's another guy who died of laughter. Let's move on. Alright, here we go, back to some stupid stuff. You remember how in the first video we talked about Greek lawmaker Charondas? Long story short, he established a law that anyone who brought a weapon to a political meeting should be executed. Then one day he accidentally strolled into an assembly with a knife on his belt, and then took his own life on the spot to stay true to his principles. Well, what if we had that same story, but in the opposite direction? What if we had a man who was such a sniveling little piss baby that he met the Grim Reaper due to the lamest reasons imaginable? Francois Vatel was the manager for Louis Grand Condé, who was a big fancy French war general. He was super duper important, super powerful dude, take my word for it. Francois was put in charge of running a banquet to honor King Louis XIV, who was also known as Louis the Great. Now, Louis was also a very important dude. If you don't believe me, take a look at how long his Wikipedia page is. Yeah, he's pretty important. Francois wanted to make this a real doorbuster event, so he promised people attending that even though they'd be paying for their seat, they'd only need the edge, because everyone was expecting over 2,000 people to show up. So now imagine you're Francois. You're the official speaker for a very high-ranking and respected general. You're creating a party for one of the most powerhouse kings of all time, and you're expecting literally thousands upon thousands of people to be there. What do? Well, if your plan is to whine like a little bitch so much that it kills you, you'd be Francois Vatel. The party was underway, people were making merry. King Louis was regaling the entire crowd with an amazing story that we actually have written in documents. This is what he said. And this guy not only killed 3 blue whales with his bare hands in the same weekend that he started democracy in America, but I heard that he absolutely rocks every pair of sunglasses he ever wears. As King Louis, I declare Huggbees the new leader of France. That's a direct quote, by the way. I'm just reading Wikipedia. While this all was happening, Francois was in the kitchen throwing a hissy fit that the seafood hadn't arrived. All he could talk about was that the seafood was late. He used it as a springboard to bitch and moan about all the other small issues that had arisen, but his primary existence in life at that point spiraled down into just how goddamn late the seafood was, which proved to be too much for Francois, because he became so distraught over the party's late seafood delivery that he found his sword and ran himself himself through it. Needless to say, he died. But want to know what turns this tragic crybaby into a hilarious crybaby? His body was only found later by an employee of his coming to tell him that the seafood had arrived. I want to give a big shout out to my main man, God, for making something funnier than I could ever come up with. Molière was a French playwright who looked at Shakespeare's works and said, "Nah, I can do better." And better he did, because he also took role as an actor in many of his plays. But no amount of pretending to be someone else on the planet could save him from his very uniquely Molière fate. Molière probably wanted to go out like his main bitch Eleanor Roosevelt, because he contracted tuberculosis. Later on, Molière was performing Les Malades Imaginaires, which translated into English, instead of spoken like an American, means imaginary invalid, which, when translated from the original French title, could also mean the hypochondriac. Now, you may have just pushed aside your powdered wig with your royalty hand fan here to amuse yourself with the irony. Oh, a man with tuberculosis? Starring in a play entitled The Hypochondriac? Oh, my word, what buffoonery! You would scoff as you dismiss your servant to fetch more of those delectable little cheese tarts. But don't worry, it gets even funnier, Your Highness. During the play, Molière collapsed on stage and began coughing up blood. That happens. The guy had tuberculosis, you can't really blame him. But what you can blame him for is refusing to cancel the performance and insisting to continue, even though shit was looking pretty grim. Throughout the remainder of the play, he hid his convulsions in his performance and made it all the way to the finale of the play. The show ended with his character dead in a chair, and Molière, forever a weird theater kid with the most embarrassing MySpace page you could ever imagine, found this to be a fitting end for himself as well. He became lifeless in that chair and had to be carried home in it to his house, where he actually died for real. That's pretty crazy. An actor playing a character who dies and then actually dying in real life in a similar way? That's pretty damn ironic. You know, this probably is unrelated, but it got me thinking, does anyone know when the next Steve Irwin special is coming out? I really like that guy. And finally, Henry Hall. If you feel bad laughing at the misfortunes of other people's life enders, don't feel too bad about this one, because Henry was 94 when he died. What's the age limit for someone's death being funny? Like, yeah, young people dying is obviously a tragedy, but what's the line for like, yeah, take that, you old fuck? I'm gonna say it's 80. Okay, so in my mind, anyone like 80 and older has a funny death. You know, so Henry was 94. He was fucking ancient, so it's fine. But don't think it too funny, because he was also a badass. Okay, so in 1755, Henry was a lighthouse keeper at a lighthouse called Rudyard's Tower. You'd think they'd call it Rudyard's Lighthouse, but tower sounds cooler and it helps keep out invading orcs and goblins, so it's fine. At around 2 a.m. on the day of the incident, Henry was patrolling the lighthouse, most likely filming a black and white film where he spills his beans, when the roof caught on fire. Henry flipped his shit and began throwing buckets of water in the air to try to put it out. 2 other lighthouse keepers on the island joined him and probably were just finishing up a lobster dinner that they were mighty fond of. Henry looked to the top of the lighthouse to see if he was accomplishing anything, at which point he was showered with molten lead that poured from the lighthouse roof. The lead landed on his head, face, neck, shoulders, and most fuck-uppedly, down his throat. Now, how'd that happen? Well, here's a dramatic recreation of what Henry looked like when he gazed to the top of the lighthouse. Henry felt his mouth swallowing a good chunk of liquid metal and screamed, direct quote, "My God, I'm on fire inside." Holy shit, this is like the perfect thing to steal for a death metal song. Literally? But surprisingly, the goopy lead didn't kill him, but that raging lighthouse fire sure as shit was going to. So he and the other 2 lighthouse keeps fled to a nearby cave to take shelter. Now, this fire was so nutty that it continued to burn until the next morning, wherein one of the lighthouse keepers probably remarked, "Well, now how are we supposed to have afternoon tea? My whole day's ruined." But then the day was saved, as a passing boat was flagged down by the men and pulled up to rescue them from the smelting inferno. Oops! They seem to have forgotten that Jesus hates all lighthouse keepers because the seas were too rough for them to dock. Now, if Henry and his co-workers were sniveling Pamby boys, this is where the story would end. But these dudes benched like 225 pounds. Sorry, 100 kilograms. They're British. That's my fault. The sailors on the boat threw a rope to the lighthouse boys and dragged them into the ocean to safety like the most pitiful water skiing you had ever seen. But it worked. They then managed to swim aboard onto the boat, and when everyone was asked if they were okay, Henry probably just said never better and took a swig of the blackest, bitterest tea you could ever imagine. The whole group decided it'd be fun to visit the hospital, where Henry Hall was seen by Dr. Henry Spry, who was a leading surgeon. According to Dr. Spry, Henry spoke in a hoarse voice, scared to be heard. And that's when Henry revealed the secret to his superhuman toughness. He told Dr. Spry that he had ingested melted lead, and that he used his unlocked chakra gates to transfer it to his limbs, allowing him to endure 3 times as much punishment as any mere human. And if this doctor didn't fix him up, Henry was going to show him what the Assassin's Fist Ansatsuken style is all about. Dr. Spry, needless to say, laughed like a fucking maniac. Oh yeah, dude, sure, yeah, totally. You swallowed molten lead and you're still alive. Uh-huh, oh yeah, oh, of course. Of course you were able to swallow molten lead and then with all those injuries drag yourself through the water onto a boat without drowning or succumbing to them. No, yeah, of course. Yeah, oh yeah, do that with your hands. You can totally fire a Hadouken. Trust me, you did it last night in your sleep. We all clapped. Everyone clapped. We're gonna give you $100. That's what Dr. Spry said. So, credit to Dr. Spry. Initially, his call of bullshit seemed right. Henry was able to eat, drink, swallow medicine, scream Hadouken, all while throwing his arms forward like that. Everything was fine. But Henry still never dropped his claims that he was world-famous actor Robert Downey Jr., because if you checked in his stomach, you would see he was Iron Man. 6 days into his hospital visit, everyone assumed he'd be getting better, but he began to get much worse and could no longer eat or drink. Then he developed cold sweats and spasms and died 12 days later. Of lead poisoning. Dr. Spry performed an autopsy on Henry, and while doing so, he went, can you believe this guy said that he fucking swallowed molten lead and lived? Oh my god, yeah, okay. The stuff that people tell me to get opioids, am I right? Alright, scalpel. Let me just cut open his stomach here and... Dr. Spry pulled a 7-ounce piece of lead out of Henry's stomach, and it was shaped like this. Bullshit, right? No way. That's what everyone that Dr. Spry told about this thought. The Royal Society, which is Britain's big collective of scientists, thought that this was such a bullshit story that Dr. Spry got so exasperated trying to prove that this happened that he considered conducting experiments on chickens where he would pour molten lead down their throats to show that they could survive afterwards. Because this does sound like bullshit, and it really should be bullshit. But it wasn't. Here's the facts of what happened, and I'm gonna enunciate this to make all of you out there who don't push forward every single day, who think skipping workout days is a fine idea, who don't ask your crush out, who don't take a chance with your dreams. I'm going to enunciate this so that all of you out there who do that feel bad. A 94-year-old man got molten lead poured on his face and down his throat while trying to extinguish a raging inferno using buckets of water. Then he held on long enough after that to swim into a boat and get to a hospital where he survived for 12 days after the fact. If you right there watching are not out there living your life to the fullest, then I feel no pity for you. Because this story lets me know that you have no excuse. Anyway, that about wraps up this video. I gotta get back out there and continue living my perfect life to the fullest. On the next time that we cover this list, we're going to be talking about the 19th century and later, which means that we'll be covering a lot of people you've probably already heard of, because they're more famous and more well documented, and there's a lot more evidence to them, which is good, because there's a good chance a lot of the older ones are urban legends or myths or whatever, whereas these modern ones are pretty fucking provable. Because one of the ways that we can prove that they actually happened is, this is the era of when we start getting video cameras and photos, which means that you might be able to just Google some of these deaths and watch the footage of them actually happen. You sick fuck. All right, that's all the time we have. I've been your host, Huggbees, and thank you so much for joining me. Have a good night. Oh. Oh, man. Did you enjoy the show? Did you enjoy it? Hey, come on. Yeah. Oh.